Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is another episode of Morbid Planet. I'm your host, Erin Chapman. And tonight we have a special guest with us. They are the author of the Dark Passage series. They also host a podcast called Get the Knaak. And they also write for a website called The Jerry Project. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our guest tonight. This is Jerry Knaak.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you had me the other week, so it's kind of,
Little quid pro quo, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to start off with a few things. Like, I looked into you a little bit, did some research, because we've known each other, I think, for a couple years, just kind of through Facebook.
Yeah, three or four, maybe even longer than that now.
Okay. It's been a while, but just for our viewers, because you have a really impressive resume. Can you tell us about like the different projects that you work on and kind of how you got into them?
Sure. As far as writing goes, I've kind of been doing it most of my adult life, right? I actually used to fix airplanes in the Navy, and I would write some things for our cruise book and our newsletter, and all my coworkers were like, "Why are you here? Why aren't you doing something involving media?" Right? So I ended up trying to go do something else. Okay. Took a physical, found out I was colorblind, and they said, no, you can't fix airplanes anymore. So I picked journalism of all things, right? Okay. So 10 years in the Navy, 6 or 7 of it was working radio and television and also writing for a magazine. I got my start in sports writing, believe it or not, covering the Canadian Football League. Yes, I'm familiar with the BC Lions and all of that. And the Canadian Football League had expanded into the US, and there was a team in Baltimore, and they're back up in Montreal now. But the Baltimore Stallions, and I covered them the year they won the Grey Cup. So that got me into that. I ended up working in the National Football League for 20 years. Wow. I worked for the now Las Vegas Raiders for 20 years. And somewhere along the line, I decided to write fiction. Okay. Right. But before that, I started the blog, right? So the blog originally was to keep me in check for exercise and weight loss and that kind of thing. It was an accountability thing.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I started off, blogging once or twice a week, talking about, the struggles in trying to lose weight and becoming an exercise fanatic and all this other stuff. Yeah. Then I decided I'd branch into pop culture, right? So I just started blogging about whatever I felt like blogging about. It became a creative outlet. Then I decided to write fiction, and that was somewhere in 2016. It took me a year to write my first book. Okay. I landed a book deal. One book turned into 3. Yeah. So, that's kind of where I am with that. I write short stories here and there, but the blog and the podcast have been the most consistent creative outlets for me. Yeah. So been doing the blog since 2013 and been doing the podcast since 2016.
Yeah, I think it said season 5 you're in right now. Right?
Yep.
Okay. And I like to go a little bit back with some people just because I'm always curious. I wanted to know, what were you like as a kid? Because a lot of people are different when I ask this question. And sometimes it's very similar to how they are now. And other times it's like totally opposite.
Erin, what you see is what you get. Outgoing, type A personality, but not, obnoxious type A. I don't work as a hedge fund manager or anything like that. I'm not, so type A that, I'm trying to buy a Ferrari or anything. No, I've always been outgoing. I played sports, love playing sports, whether it was sandlot or organized. I played baseball, basketball, football, ran cross country one year in high school, student government in high school. So always involved in stuff, always outgoing. Yeah. I ran the school newspaper. I was on student council. What else? So
you have your bit of writing actually kind of was like back then if you were doing the newspaper.
You know what, Erin, it's so funny. I think about it now and I wish I could go back, but whatever, hindsight being 2020. I don't understand why I did not click that I should be in some form of media a lot sooner. Right. Yeah. My father was a disc jockey in the 60s and early 70s. Yeah. So like, why didn't I get into this? I loved I still have it. It's not the original one, but I have a game called Electric Football. right? It's
Okay.
a metal board. You have little plastic guys on it. You flip a switch and then go bzzz across the field, and you set it up and you run football plays, right?
Okay.
Game's been around since the 50s and 60s, and I got my first one when I was 7 years old. I used to get a tape recorder and do play-by-play,
Oh,
right? Yeah. So I'm like, why am I not doing this? Right. So I eventually end up doing it while I'm in the service,
yeah.
having a grand old time with it. One of the, and this was one of the reasons why I started the podcast in the first place. I miss radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I hosted a podcast for the Raiders for 2 years, and then I've had my own, obviously, but I love radio. And I, that was the most fun I had in the years I was in journalism in the Navy. So,
And it's cool that now, like, just with technology and the way everything is, it's like you're fortunate enough that, you know what, you can make your own, publish it, it's out there, the world can listen. Which,
yep, exactly.
years
And
ago,
then same thing, with this kind of thing. I thought about like YouTube, right? Doing video and that kind of thing. And I thought, audio gives me the opportunity to freeform and spitball a little bit more, right? Yeah. And we were talking, before the show started, talking about editing and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I don't want to spend a lot of time editing. So,
yeah. No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can put my feet up on the desk and have a glass of scotch and just. Well,
I can put my feet up too, but then people can see my feet.
Yeah. So but personality wise, as a kid, and now I haven't changed much at all. If anything, I'm a little more mellow, if you can imagine that.
You're a little calm, chill.
Just a little bit, not much, but a little bit. But yeah, it's what you see is what you get.
And most people that I've talked to, especially because in the vampire genre and horror genre, things like that, most people tend to have like this aha moment in their life when something just pops to them, and it's when they got into vampires or horror or things like that.
Or zombies or whatever.
What was your aha moment if you look back on it?
I was 4. And my mother was fantastic. She's the greatest mom in the history of moms. But somehow, some way, I watched Dan Curtis's Dracula when I was 4, starring Jack Palance as Dracula. And the character that, I don't know, just the scenes on the screen. I didn't know what I was watching, but just the scenes, the camera work, the cinematography, right? The darkness of the character. I was drawn to it.
Were you just like glued to this? Like,
yeah, I was just, it was scary and everything else. I'm 4. I'm watching it on this old 19-inch Zenith television. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? So by the time I'm 9 or 10, and I don't know if you have anything similar in Canada, but in American schools, you would get this thing called the Scholastic Weekly Reader. And the teachers would tell you, okay, I want you to buy this book. And you had to buy whatever the required book was. But then you could also buy whatever you wanted. So I had my parents get me a copy of Dracula and a copy of Frankenstein. So I was reading Gothic horror at age 9, 10 years old. Again, not fully understanding what I was reading, but that's what I was drawn to.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you get the where I grew up, Friday or Saturday night, it was chiller theater, right? So there was always some scary movie on at Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah.
So, over time into my early teens, I'm watching that. I'm watching, we have, USA Network used to have this thing called Commander USA's Groovy Movies. And on a Saturday afternoon, he would do like a double feature. It was like Mystery Science Theater, but before Mystery Science Theater. He would introduce these films and make fun of them. But, it was all kinds of stuff, everything from giant monster movies to Dracula films to you name it. And so it's just, I gravitated
towards getting that.
it.
I never saw it, but yeah.
Unfortunately, the guy who played Commander USA passed away a few years ago. It was cheesy. It was, but it got you into it in a fun way. And I'd spend Saturday afternoons, as growing up where you are. I grew up in New York, so we had nasty weather and nothing better than, Saturday afternoon watching monster movies or scary movies. So it's what I gravitated to. My favorite movie of all time is 1933's King Kong. And my best friend and I, we had like a rubber gorilla, and we were building skyscrapers out of cardboard boxes and drawing windows on them and reenacting the movies. So yeah, it's what we gravitated toward as kids.
Okay. I know one of the things I remember watching when I was a kid, and I used to get up really early because for whatever reason it was on like 6 a.m. and I would get up and watch it before school. Was House of Frankenstein. Did you ever watch that? And it was like a bad comedy and it was so cheesy, but I
Yeah, I remember that vaguely. I
Yeah.
vaguely remember that.
They had
Yeah.
like a Dracula who was in the castle, and then they had a wolf man who like played hippie type music. And yeah,
I vaguely remember that.
I
Yeah.
used to get up really early and I'd just sit in the dark downstairs and I'd be watching it because no one else was up in the house. But yeah, that was one of the first things I liked and I watched. I was about 5, maybe. So yeah.
My dad and I would watch stuff late at night on a Friday night or Saturday night after mom had gone to bed. And it was always some kind of, scary movie. I wrote a blog post about it, made for TV vampire movie in the 70s, and made in 72, but I saw it much later, called Kolchak the Night Stalker. And
yeah. And that's the one we were talking about. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Darren McGavin, who's in A Christmas Story, plays Ralphie's dad. He's a newspaper reporter in Las Vegas. And there's this vampire mystery in Las Vegas, and he's the guy who cracks it. Nobody believes him. So I won't give you any spoilers because I think it's worth watching. You can find the whole thing on YouTube, right here on YouTube. And,
I know I actually made a note of that to see if I could watch it, because it's funny you say the guy from The Christmas Story. I've never actually watched that movie. And people are like, what? And it's just things I've never got around to watching. So
well, it was one of those that kind of tanked when it came out in 1983. That came out around the same time as some other more popular stuff.
It's the one with the awkward kid, right? With the
yep. He wants the BB gun. That's the thing he wants. And but it's become a cult classic. And TNT or TBS, they run a marathon every Christmas all day long.
Well, that's the thing. I've tried to watch it each Christmas, because there's other stuff I watch, like, It's a Wonderful Life and things. And it's just one of those things that I've never got around to catching on TV or finding it. So maybe I'll try this year.
Right. Yeah. The other thing too is just to kind of, the stuff that we grew up on. I gravitated, as much as I love Bugs Bunny, I was watching Scooby-Doo, I was watching Goober and the Ghost Chasers, anything that was involved, spooky and ghosts and hobgoblins and that kind of thing. That's what I was into. But Scooby-Doo is fantastic.
So you're a published author, you're a podcaster, a blogger. Which project over the years has had the most meaning for you? And it's like a labor of love. And which one are you most proud of at this point that you've gotten up to?
It has to be writing the first book and getting it published. I think, if you like books at all, right? If you read and you are an avid reader, you like bookstores, you like stories and that kind of thing, and you aspire to be a writer, you hear all the stories, right? I started it, I didn't finish it. I finished it, but I've been rejected 42 times. You even look at some of the more famous authors, J.K. Rowling and a lot of others were rejected numerous times.
Yeah.
Right. So when you look at that, I count myself as lucky. The publishing deal that I got, it was one query acceptance right off the bat. I didn't query any other publishers, just serendipity. Right. But I think the fact that I finished it, that I wrote the end at the end of something that I actually got off to a really bad start. And I set it aside for 5 years and said, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to wait until I'm ready for this. When I picked it back up, it took off. And so, being able to write, a complete novel, complete story.
Just so our viewers know, what's the title, or do you have one there?
It is called The Dark Truth. It's book 1 in the Dark Passage series. I have a new publisher. The other 2 books, books 2 and 3 were out. So we had The Dark Truth, Dark Descent, Dark Terror, Dark. But they're all set in modern day San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm a firm believer in writing what you know.
Yeah.
But where a lot of people get confused with that is, I got to write a memoir. Nobody's going to read my autobiography. No. Your life experiences inform your writing.
Yeah. I've
got a character in this book named Steve. He's the conglomeration of every gym bro you've ever known in your life.
Yeah.
Right. Every overgrown muscle head. His teeth are too white. He's obnoxious. He's one of those guys. Right. So I've known many people like that, not just one. So he's a combination, right? The main character is a lot like me in many, many ways. Right. So You'd find a lot of pop culture references in the book because that's how I talk with my friends, right? We
It's
quote
funny
movie
you
lines.
say that. That's one of the things, because I've read the first and second book, is that's one of the things that made me laugh, was I'd be sitting there reading and then you'd say something about like Friends and I'm just like, ah. But again, it's because I grew up watching that. So I guess with certain people, generations, if they read it, then it go over their head. But otherwise, for the age group, yeah, I liked all those that, they just pop up randomly. So
Yeah, and like I said, I talk to my friends that way, right? We'll quote movies like Pulp Fiction or Goodfellas and stuff like that, and it's just kind of the way we talk. You can't obviously rip off lines from these things, but if they inform or you just drop a reference,
yeah,
right? You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean. You get the inference, and
yeah,
you know the frame of mind the character is in when you do that.
yeah.
And I think that it doesn't take the place of good narrative storytelling. It
Mhm.
adds some salt and pepper to it.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like that part. And while we're on the topics of the books, do you want to give everyone just a summary what they're about?
Yeah. So it starts off with a woman named Elizabeth. She works in public relations, as I do now, and that's just merely a coincidence. Um, and she goes for a night out with a coworker and girlfriend, and it goes badly from there. And Elizabeth is kidnapped and murdered and turned into a vampire, and hilarity ensues. No, I'm kidding. No, she has to learn how to survive. Right. I think it's very experiential, right? It's one of those things where it's not quite as deep as Anne Rice went with some of Louis' experiences in the Vampire Chronicles, but it scratches that surface, right? So if you woke up tomorrow in a drawer in the morgue after dying and coming back, what would you do?
Yeah.
Right. So this is all about, there's three books worth of number one. She would like to exact some bloody revenge on the person that did this to her, but it's also all about her learning how to adapt her abilities, survive. She's a little impulse control problem. She's got a foul mouth and talks like a sailor, and but yeah, she along the way, you never know who she's going to meet. I didn't know who she was going to meet along the way.
Yeah.
Right. So I like about they call us writers like that. They call us pantsers, right? Because we fly by the seat of our pants and don't plot anything. So there were plenty of times when I was trying to get Elizabeth to go somewhere or do something, and she's like, "No, I'll do what I want, and then I'll get there eventually." But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's all about what happened to her on a fateful night and what she has to do to survive, and she meets all kinds of characters along the way. She meets vampire hunters along the way, you name it.
Yeah.
And um
I
there
like
was a
also
lot.
how she evolves, and just like, no spoilers to people if you are going to pick it up, but as she evolves and discovers different abilities and things like that. So
I
yeah.
looked at it as like a fight or flight kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like, if you woke up tomorrow as a vampire, it's not like exactly what you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
Right. So in her particular case, she discovers new abilities, or they just happen to her when she's put in stressful situations.
Yeah.
And what I tried to do with it, and you as somebody who studies this and studies the lore and the mythology and history of the genre, I tried to put a lot of older mythology and older tropes kind of back in.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted some of that Bram Stoker-esque mythology in the story. And I think in an effort for people to be different, and because we always say, what are you adding to the narrative, right? What's different about your character or
Yeah,
your,
which a lot of
especially
people
if you're
look for, because it's like, how do
right.
your book stand out from the other person's book? And yeah, that's where it comes unique, and you have to bring that out with the characters, with how you write and everything. Because
Exactly.
I'm
And
sure you've
if
read
you're
books
doing,
of theirs where it's like,
well, if you're also doing something in any of these monster categories, right,
yeah,
there's going to be some basics. But a lot of people are looking, like you said, for what's different, what's new, what's, whether it doesn't matter if it's a vampire, a werewolf, or a zombie, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. What's different about yours? For me, it was kind of going back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
So let's
No,
put all.
that's why I like it. It's very good.
Well, I appreciate
I said
that.
I
Thank
need
you.
to read the third one. It's on my list. I just need to do it. So
Gotcha. And there will be a fourth, right? So what we're doing in the process with the new publisher is we're republishing the first three.
Okay.
So they all have a home.
Nice.
And then the fourth one will be brand new. If you recall Detective Dietrich in the story, it'll be his backstory.
Okay.
So a lot of people were in the process of reading these were like, oh man, I like that guy. I like that character.
Which is awesome with books. It's like when you're writing them, because as people start to go through them and read them and fall in love with these characters, then they're like, oh, I want to know more about this one.
Yeah, exactly.
It just opens the door for you.
Yeah, and I kind of had it in the back of my head anyway that there was some mythology to him and some pathos with him, and I thought he'd have an interesting story, and I like noir anyway, right? I love film noir and that kind of thing, so it gave me an opportunity to go deeper into that noir category.
Okay, so if you haven't picked it up yet, viewers, you need to pick up a copy of each one because they're amazing.
Thank you.
And we will put links in the description after for everyone, just so you have the titles and you can look them up and where to find them. And it sounds like you're so busy. I know I'm always busy, but it sounds like you're busy. When you get downtime, what do you like to do?
Well, right now it's all about watching football, right? I mean, football, college, pro. It's we've got fans back in the stands, whether I agree with that or not, because of COVID-19, but that is what is, right? So I prefer it with fans in the stands. So, so the last 2 months or so has been all about watching football and getting back to that. But just moved here to Washington State, so I'm a lot closer to you now.
Yes, you're hours away.
Yeah, and so still getting settled into the new house, still getting used to living somewhere other than California.
And the weather.
But after living in drought for so long, I'll take the rain, and I like the gloom, and those of us who like what we like, the macabre, the morbid, the spooky, there's no better place to live than here. This is great, right? So getting used to everything. But yeah, there's the day job, I also ghostwrite, so there's that. And then it seems like lately the fiction gets pushed to the side, right? So that's the one thing.
Hard with certain projects. You kind of got to make sure it doesn't go too far over, and then you got to steer yourself back.
Yeah, and this time of year with the blog, it's very seasonal, right? So I'm doing a countdown of my favorite vampire films. With that, I'm probably going to get back into the whole exercise regimen and start blogging about that again. But it's interesting trying to find time for all this. It helps that I work at home, right? So when I was commuting and sitting in a car for 3 hours a day and trying to get the gym time in and trying to get the writing in, and
you lose that time, and it's like there's so much more things you can get done. So I know I'm fortunate. It's like a 5-minute walk for me to go to work, which is the first time like ever. And it's same thing. I get back so much time, and I'm home in 5 minutes. I can start doing what I want to do instead of, oh, I've been sitting on the train or whatever for an hour or in traffic, and then you're tired and then you come home and it's.
And so many people asked me, and they said, okay, why don't you dictate your writing, right? Mm-hmm. Just get a recorder, dictate it. You're in the car for so long. Like, okay, well, first of all, you try bumper to bumper traffic in the San Francisco Bay Area and see if you can dictate anything. But the other thing is, for me, it's the process, and the process goes from here to here. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go here, right? Yeah. It flows through my hands, because that, to me, that's what writing is, right? Yeah. It starts with a pen and a piece of paper, but then now it's all about from the brain to the fingers to the keyboard. Yeah, I can't articulate what comes out that way. I can't speak it.
I don't think I could either for a lot of stuff that I've written. It's like I've tried doing that before with ideas, but it's not something where like I have to then type it out, reread it, adjust it, reread it, adjust it, and go that way. I can't just, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people who edit on the fly. Mm-hmm. Right. And you get all these people who tell you, oh, just write it. Don't worry about spelling, grammar, or structure or anything. Just get it out. I
Yeah.
can't do that. It's not, and maybe that's the nonfiction writer, maybe that's the journalist, the reporter, the whatever I've been over the years. I can't do that.
Yeah. No, I
I
get
have to, and
that.
my editors all tell me when they get the book, they'll tell me, oh, your writing is really clean. I'm like, well, good. That was the idea. All right.
With all your successes with your different projects and everything you've done so far, is there anything that's been really hard that you've had to overcome in your life?
In my life, yeah. Just life. I mean, I was in the service for 10 years. Working in football is very difficult at times, right? But just things in life to overcome. Wow, that's a difficult question. I think it's finding time for the things you want to do, right?
Yeah.
You got all this stuff you have to do, but
Yeah.
then how do you find time for the things that you want to do, the things that make you happy, the things that beyond work? We all have to work, we have to make money and put roof over our heads and food on the table. But
Mhm.
how do you do the things you like? And I think this is why a lot of people end up couch potatoes, right? Because
Yeah.
you just kind of real life gets to you, right? So I think for me, it's finding that time. And what you got to do, at least from my perspective, is you got to make a sacrifice somewhere.
Mhm.
Right. And what is that sacrifice? For me early on, like with exercise, when I first, got into it and decided, oh, I'm going to be in better shape, I'm going to lose weight and all that, I sacrificed television.
Yeah.
Like, what is on TV that I got to watch so bad? What can I give up?
Yeah, because I've done the same mentality where I guess some new shows that have started up now with September and October, and I'm finding the PVR is getting higher and higher and fuller and fuller. And then
Mm-hmm.
so I'm like, oh, okay, well, do I want to work on this or do I want to watch this? And I'm like, am I going to really enjoy this? And then I've actually, the last week, I've gone through and deleted a few shows. I'm like, no, it's not that important. So I like chopped it. So yeah, I agree with you. It's, prioritize, where it's like if you're going to binge and watch something like on Netflix all day on a Saturday, obviously then there's other stuff you could have done. But yeah.
Sure. And I've written books, when I was living at the last house, sitting behind the couch. Right. Yeah. I think Alexa is a great invention. And I would tell Alexa to play some jazz, and jazz would fill the room. And who knows what my family was doing at the time, but I'm sitting there with the computer, and I wrote one book from the couch. And it just, if it's a priority for you, if it's important to you, you'll make the time for it. Just like I did with exercise. I went from no exercise to the gym 4 to 6 days a week.
Yeah.
What's your priority, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. And if you can, especially with the commute that I had,
Yeah.
if you can find the time for the things that are important, or make the time.
And when you had to do 3 hours of commuting.
Right. So I would do the commute. I'd go to work, and I would bring my own food to work, so I wouldn't, eat badly during the day. And, I was lucky my last few years there, I was able to use the team's facility.
Nice.
I had a home gym as well. I turned my office into a home gym, so I could work out pretty much anywhere. I was a runner for a while, so I made all these things a priority. And when I decided to start writing books, and I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, but they tell you have your whole life to write your first book.
Mm-hmm.
You got about a year to write your second one.
Yeah.
Because if you get that deal, now you got deadlines.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
All right. So I ended up writing 3 books within, like 2.5 years. And it took me 2 years to write the 4th one because I didn't have a publishing deal.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of let it drag out a little bit. But yeah, to answer that question, time, finding time, making time, whatever, and you have to tell yourself there's a sacrifice that has to be made.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. You can't not, because there's just not enough hours in the day.
Yeah.
Right. If you want your entertainment, you got to have your job. You got to exercise. You got to do all those things. Something's got to go.
Yeah. Can you tell us about a fun fact that not everyone knows about you?
Oh, fun fact that not everybody knows about me. I'm such an open book.
This one I like to ask because I get weird.
Yeah, this is I mean, everybody knows horror movies and vampire, everybody knows all that. Everybody knows I love sports. Um wow, this is yeah. I've been putting it out there more and more and more, but I really have become a fan the last several years, maybe the last 5 years or so, of beat literature, right? So I have been, it's becoming more and more evident, but I've read On the Road by Jack Kerouac twice. And it's not just that I like reading this stuff, I like learning about them.
Okay.
Right. The Allen Ginsbergs, the Neil Cassidys, all the guys that made up the beat generation of the 1950s, these counterculture guys that predated the hippies.
Yeah.
I have become, I don't know, I can't say obsessed, but very, very interested in what went on in post World War II America through their lens. Right. Because it was becoming this gray flannel suburban, let's get all the GIs a job, and they were all moving out to the suburbs, and
yeah,
the beats were like, no, this isn't right. Everybody's becoming automatons, right? So they wrote what at the time people thought was subversive literature, and it was funny because a lot of people discovered Jack Kerouac late in high school or in college, and I didn't really start reading the beats until I was in my 40s.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, when it comes to that, I mean, I like jazz, but people know that. It's let's see. I mean, everybody knows I like schlock horror movies, even though I thought Malignant was terrible. Yeah, it's I think that would be the one thing maybe some people would be surprised to know is I got a thing for the beats and beat literature.
Okay. And one of my last questions then is, what's the most absurd thing that you love?
Most absurd thing has to be B horror films, right? I mean, I love like all the 50s giant bug movies, right? The giant mantis and tarantula and them and all that. It's got to be the most absurd thing, right? So I like almost any kind of vampire movie. I watched the Satanic Rites of Dracula last night with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing from the early 70s. Even though those things were popular and successful at the time, they're not as well regarded, except for those of us diehard Hammer Studio fans, right? Hammer Studios follows me on Twitter, which blows my mind.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and so does Tony Todd, the original Candyman, right? So Tony Todd and I are like this. But yeah, it's that would be the absurd thing, is just bad horror movies and bad creature features.
Okay, it's good. I haven't seen a lot of those, if any of them, but that's okay. I know of them. So
right. I mean, I think anybody who wants to get into this genre, right? I mean, our mutual pal, Anthony Hogg, said this at one point, that there are many different entries into, we were talking vampires specifically, but he said there's many entry points. I think when it comes to the horror genre, if you really, really want to embrace it, you go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And you go back to either 1922's Nosferatu, you go back to 1925's Phantom of the Opera. Mm-hmm. And you watch all of Universal's canon all the way up to 1956 with the creature from the Black Lagoon movies.
Yeah. And
you also watch the stuff that other studios were putting out, right? Everybody thinks Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was Universal, but it wasn't. It was either MGM or Paramount. They wanted to get in a horror game too. Watch things like King Kong, the original. I mean, some people might think, oh, the stop motion, it's bad, it's clunky, it's this, that, and the other thing. If it wasn't for that stuff, the stuff we like today, the stuff we watch today wouldn't exist, right? So Peter Jackson, he did the remake of King Kong in 2005. The original is the reason why he became a filmmaker in the first place.
Yeah, right? It comes around, and that's the cool part.
Exactly. And I we've talked about the book Dracula a couple of times, and I know where your head is with it. But a lot of times when it comes to literature, right, to understand today's horror, you kind of got to understand Gothic horror from the late 1800s, and weird things like Penny Dreadful. If you don't like Dracula, read Edgar Allan Poe. And a lot of this stuff is, the language is thick. It's way too many flowery adjectives, and it doesn't get to the point. But again, if it wasn't for that stuff, the stuff we're reading today would not. This would not exist because I wouldn't have written it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, again, many points of entry. But to understand it, I think you kind of got to go back in time, and you don't have to be. It doesn't have to be scholarship.
Yeah.
At least have an understanding of where it came from, so you know where it's going. And I'm like that with a lot of things, right? I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, that's the way we've always done it." My thing is to understand where you want to go or where you're going. You got to know where you came from.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, it was, for films, it was Universal horror.
Yeah.
I still say they created the first cinematic universe, and it was by accident. They didn't plan it. And then when it comes to books and that kind of thing, you got to go back to Shelley. You got to go back to Byron and Polidori and that crowd with Gothic literature. Right. And then, I think because the stuff that some of us came in with, like in your case with Anne Rice, you think Anne Rice writes Interview with a Vampire if she hadn't read Gothic horror?
Exactly. Something influenced everyone at some point in their life. So
exactly. And I know there's some Sherlock Holmes influence in, with you with the Highgate vampire and all that stuff. There's, it might not be direct.
Watson.
Yeah. So, and Arthur Conan Doyle had a lot to do with dinosaur movies, if you can believe it or not. He wrote The Lost World that was filmed by Willis O'Brien in 1925. And that's the guy who does King Kong in 1933 with Marion C. Cooper. So
one of my favorite things, actually, when we go to England normally each year is I love Dartmoor, and The Hounds of Baskerville took place in Dartmoor. And when you go to Dartmoor, most of the time it's foggy, it's eerie, it's creepy looking. And then it's like you envision the story taking place there. So it's one of my favorite places. We always like to go there for walks and stuff.
And then go watch 1981's An American Werewolf in London. They're on the foggy moors, right? And all these things inform each other, right? Exactly. So, John Landis more than likely saw The Hound of the Baskervilles at some point and was inspired by that kind of atmosphere, right? It's again, everybody that influences us today was influenced by something else. That's a very astute observation you just made.
Okay. So that's about all the time we have today, but I think at this point, I'd love to get you back on, and I think we could just chat about horror films for a while. I think
100%.
So we'll have to schedule you to come back and do that. And as I said, I'm a horror fan. I know you're an amazing horror fan. But I think we have good discussions about it. So that's
100%. I think it's great. And I love these, granted we become friends too, but reciprocal relationships, to be guests on each other's programs and inform our audiences. And, I think folks like us, it's like an infectious enthusiasm. And the more people
and it's nice when you can connect with people and talk to them about things that you're both interested in, which doesn't always happen very often. So it's when it does, it's great. So that's why I like it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I enjoy chatting with you. So I'd be happy to come on. We'll have to have you on the podcast again and spitball for another hour and a half about all this craziness, all this fun stuff.
So before we go, do you want to tell our viewers where they can find you on social media, what platforms you're on?
Sure. Start with Twitter. It's at Get the Knaak, and Knaak is spelled Knaak. Facebook author page. So that's facebook.com/Jerry Knaak author. Okay. Then there's the same on Instagram at Jerry Knaak author. The podcast is on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts, and that's at Get the Knaak, or just Get the Knaak. Just search for my last name, Knaak, and you'll find it. The blog is called The Jerry Project, which don't ask me why the hell I called it that. It's gonna be I'm gonna change it to Get the Knaak anyway. But you can get there from getknaak.com.
Yeah,
right?
I actually found The Jerry Project, and then I was like,
yeah,
that's a weird title when I first read it. And then like
it was because I was a work in progress.
I know it's okay.
Right. So, but yeah, Jerry,
there, so it's good.
I always thought Get the Knaak was a little too on the nose, right? My Sharona and the Knaak and all that. But it seems to work for the Twitter handle and the name of the podcast. So I'm going to rebrand a few things. The website, the official website is jerryknaak.com. Perfect. So you can get so it's a bunch of different properties, but you search my last name, you can find me just anywhere.
And for any viewers that want to look up Jerry, which I totally recommend, we will put everything in the description below so everyone can check it out, find all the links there. And also make sure that you guys subscribe. We have a lot of really cool shows coming up at this point, and I'm looking at doing probably 2 shows a week, which is what I'm striving for right now. It's being ambitious, but I'm going for it.
I'm a subscriber. I clicked the button. I'm there.
There you go. So other than that, that's all we have. And thank you for joining us tonight, everyone from home as well. I hope you enjoyed Jerry's visit, and he'll definitely be popping back. And if you're a fan of horror movies, you'll definitely want to stay tuned, because we will touch base and chat for a while about those. So otherwise, thanks for joining us on Morbid Planet tonight, and stay safe and stay morbid.